Now available in paperback and Kindle, All About Marilyn. Learn all about the struggles of a faded former teen sitcom star in this absolutely fabulous 5-star screenplay. Get All About Marilyn in paperback and Kindle on Amazon.com today.
Hollywood Historical Women in Crisis.
One of my viewers wanted me to do another installment in the Hollywood Historical Women in Crisis series. And for this installment in the Hollywood Historical Women in Crisis series, I'm going to be talking about Academy Award-winning actress Hattie McDaniel. Hattie McDaniel is known for the major accomplishments of being the first black woman to ever perform on radio, and is also known for being the first black woman to win an Oscar for her role as Mammy in the movie Gone with the Wind. And Hattie McDaniel, while she had great success in Hollywood, sadly was a woman on the road to becoming a woman in crisis because of the home that she was raised in when she was younger. Now, Hattie McDaniel was born in 1895 in Wichita, Kansas, and some sources list her year of birth as 1893. And she was the 13th child of two parents, a father who was a Civil War veteran who suffered from severe injuries that made it where he had a difficult time doing manual labor, and her mother was a domestic maid. And eventually, because of this home situation, Hattie McDaniel wound up on the road to becoming a woman in crisis, possibly because of this really large family where she really could not really get her emotional needs met and couldn't really get the attention she needed as a child. And basically being raised in this whole situation put her possibly on a paradigm of failure that I talk about in my book, Why 70% of Black Women Are Single, and on the road to the whole feminist paradigm that leads to women winding up dysfunctional, that I talk about in The Woman Crisis, that many suffragists also came from. Now, Hattie McDaniel's mother, she was a domestic worker, so she was working most of the time, and her father basically struggled to do any labor, and I believe that started laying the foundation for possible daddy issues with Hattie McDaniel as the family was out here struggling to stay together. And again, as the family was staying together, eventually they started to move to Colorado, and as they moved to Colorado, Hattie McDaniel was one of only 2 black students in her class, and she had a natural flair for singing, and I believe this gifted talent was one of the things that led to her looking for find a way to get attention and to get her needs met, and again started to get her building her popularity in her classes. Now, as Hattie McDaniel was going to school, eventually she did go to high school, started professionally singing, dancing, and performing as a part of a minstrel show, and then eventually decided to drop out of high school to focus on her entertainment career. And that's where she had the first of her 4 marriages. And as she had the first of those 4 marriages, eventually what happened with Hattie McDaniel is she started to build her career up. And as she started to build her career up, she started touring with vaudeville troupes and started to go was eventually performing on the radio. And eventually, as she started performing on the radio, she was the first black woman to ever perform on the radio. And then eventually started going out here and made herself a blues artist, started writing her own songs. Unfortunately, there was no royalty system back then. So she wrote songs, but she didn't have any understanding of the business as related to publishing. So she couldn't really get any money for those songs that she made. So she was out here working, but the thing is, things weren't working for Hattie McDaniel. Even though she had, again, this great success, as related to things. And again, but the whole thing is there was a lot of racism and discrimination at the time. So a lot of black entertainers, yes, you did work and did get exposure, but you really didn't get the money as related to things. And as she was out here she again went out here and she was on with Professor George Mellison's Melody Hounds and had a radio career as she was singing on KOA in Denver and recorded songs for different records, and again did not really get that compensation like she should. And eventually, after the stock market crashed, while Hattie McDaniel did make music, eventually the only job she could get was being a washroom attendant, because with the depression going on, people all were struggling, but black people struggled even more. And even as she was working as this washroom attendant at Sam Pick's Club Madrid, what happened with Hattie McDaniel is that she had to run into racism as related to things, but eventually the owner let her start performing, and as she became a regular performer, she eventually was able to make enough money to move to Los Angeles, where she joined her brother and sisters, and eventually, while she couldn't get film work, again started working as a maid and a laundress. And as she was working there, eventually she wound up her brother was able to get her a spot on the radio where she played as Hi-Hat Hattie, a bossy maid who forgets her place, which basically started to become the iconic role that she would play in films, where while the show was popular, she wasn't getting paid anything at all, which is par for the course for black actresses. And sadly, this is the other paradigm that made Hattie McDaniel a woman in crisis. Basically, as a black actress, while she did get a lot of attention and fame, but the whole thing was she wasn't fairly compensated for it. And this is what has plagued many black actresses for years. And Hattie McDaniel was one of the first to be a part of that whole black paradigm of black actresses, again, not really getting proper compensation for their roles and their performances, as she was playing this role of Hi-Hat Hattie, the bossy maid who often forgets her place. And that's where she started to get work towards her big break in The Golden West, which was a film that basically was her breakout film. And this breakout film was where she played a house servant or a mammy. And then eventually, after that film, she got another film with Mae West called I'm No Angel, where she had a major role. And then eventually she joined SAG. And after she joined SAG and got into the union, this is where she started to appearing in films on a more regular basis. And they started to get in films with people like Shirley Temple, like The Little Colonel, and Bill Bojangles Robinson, and eventually wound up starting to build up her career. And as she started to build up her career, she started to get roles in films like Alice Adams with Jean Harlow, and started to China Seas with Clark Gable, and eventually in a film Murder by Television with Bela Lugosi. So she was starring in films with a lot of A-list performers at the time, such as Jimmy Stewart with Vivacious Lady, and eventually wound up getting a big role in the film Showboat, which was one of the big films of the late 1930s. That was a huge film, and again, one of the major films. And again, as she continued to build up her career, yes, she got a lot of exposure as playing these maid roles and playing these mammy roles. Unfortunately, the studios did not go out here and compensate Hattie McDaniel in a fair fashion. No, she was one of the lowest paid actors on those films, and as one of the lowest paid actors, yes, she was just struggling again just to pay bills eventually as related to things, but again, and things were not really going like the way it was for the other A-list stars. Now, she did make, again, big money, but it wasn't as big as the white performers at the time. And eventually, after starring in lots of movies, different movies, she eventually winding up in her big iconic and signature role in 1939 when Gone with the Wind. And as she wound up getting the role as Mammy in Gone with the Wind, this is where she wound up getting criticized by members of the black community, similar to the way many members of the black community criticized Halle Berry for playing the role of Letitia Musgrove in Monsters Ball. And many people were upset because this role basically was cementing the whole idea of the mammy in people's minds as related to the only role black people could play. And this is where the NAACP started to come out against Hattie McDaniel. And Hattie McDaniel, looking to again protect her way to making a living, started bootlicking and looking to again defend Hollywood. And again, as she was rising as a star, she rose as a star and playing this role in Gone with the Wind. And eventually, people said that the role that Hattie McDaniel played was so perfect, it was just like the book that was written a long time ago, and many people basically wanted this role basically again was her signature role, and this signature role basically again defined Hattie McDaniel's career. But the whole thing that was really sad was that she experienced a lot of racism from, though as related to this film, I mean basically as she was looking to be a part of the promotion, basically she couldn't even go to the Georgia premiere because they didn't really want her to be there because, again, we had Jim Crow laws going on at the time. And as we had Jim Crow laws going on at the time in the South, Hattie McDaniel also received racism in the North as related to her being nominated for the Academy Award. Now, she was the first black person to ever be nominated for an Oscar, but they didn't even treat her with respect. I mean, they basically had the hotel she was in was a place where they didn't want to even have blacks come into the place, didn't even want blacks to come into the building, and they had to make an exception just for her, and then they had her surrounded by people. So it was really sad about Hattie McDaniel. In spite of all of her success as related to fame, she didn't really get the intangible of respect or proper compensation for the role that she played. And again, even at the Academy Awards ceremony, she couldn't even get the, again, respect as related to things. That was the saddest part about Hattie McDaniel, in spite of having this success, and again, going out here and being at the peak of her success. Eventually, what happened with Hattie McDaniel after the Gone with the Wind is that this is where she wound up going on her career continued to go on, but she didn't get that success like many post-Oscar winners do. It's like what happens was when you win the Oscar, basically your career goes into a state of decline, and the same thing sadly happened with Hattie McDaniel. Yes, she was getting films like This Is Our Life, where she played a maid once again, and she also got to play maids in films like The Male Animal and Since You Went Away, and also played another maid in Song of the South, another Disney film, again playing the stereotype roles, and again playing the stereotype roles as related to her career. And as her career went into this state of decline, basically a lot of people black people were not really into her, and sadly, as her career was going into a state of decline, she wasn't really having much success in her personal life as well. And this is where Hattie McDaniel's life goes into the paradigm of failure, because she basically, as she was getting this economic success as related to her career to the point where she could go out here and buy mansions and live fairly well, she had gotten married to different guys, and those guys really could not handle the success. I mean, the first two husbands she had were basically situations. She married one man, Howard Hickman, in 1911, who died in 1915. That man just basically died as related into the marriage. Then she married a second man who basically was like a Pookie, this George Lanford, who died of a gunshot wound a little while after they were married. So he basically got into a beef with a dude and possibly wound up getting shot in the shootout. And then she married a third man, James Lloyd Crawford, in 1941. And basically, this guy was a mangina, and this mangina, again, could not stand the fact that Hattie McDaniel had this success. And as he was feeling emasculated about Hattie McDaniel having this success, he started speaking against his own wife. And basically, this was a situation where she thought that she was pregnant and was having issues as related to things because they found out that the pregnancy wasn't real. And this is where she had a deep depression. And this man further exacerbated the problems by, again, being this mangina who was going out here, again, confiding to Hedda Hopper and different people and basically just going behind her back. And the fourth marriage she had to Larry Williams, an interior decorator, fell apart within less than a year, where they wound up falling apart because they were arguing and fussing. And I believe that they wound up arguing and fussing because what happened with them is that this, again, another beta male, was upset that she had success once again, and he also tried to cause dissension in the cast of a radio show where people she was working with were trying to work. So this guy was basically causing rumors and gossip because he wasn't a man looking to lead. No, he was a beta male looking to follow behind a woman. And as he looked to follow behind Hattie McDaniel, he was just extremely jealous of her. And as he was extremely jealous of her, he basically showed how little respect he had for her. And again, because he had no respect for her, he basically made life miserable for his wife. When usually a man, when he loves his wife, he wants to again accommodate his wife. And as Hattie McDaniel was dealing with this, she was also dealing with the fact that her career was in a state of decline, and she was no longer being able to get those films anymore. And with her not being able to get the films, she had to transition to what was considered a lower rung in the entertainment industry, because in the entertainment industry, film is considered the highest level because this is the highest paying level. And what she had to do was eventually, she couldn't get any movies after Family Honeymoon in 1949, and eventually wound up on the CBS show, The Ed Wynn Show, and wound up doing radio and television shows towards the final part of her career, and did this basically dealing with the stress of these two marriages to these two beta males, and the stress of this and the situation basically led to her health going into the state of decline. And as her health went into the state of decline, she eventually was doing a radio show, The Beulah Show. And as she did The Beulah Show, she was basically, again, it was a big hit and she was getting paid very well. And again, as she did The Beulah Show, she was getting a following as related to white people, but black people saw it as, again, a show filled with racist stereotypes, and they show it as a show filled with racist stereotypes to the point where after Hattie McDaniel, she was again dealing with the stress of dealing with the criticism from the black community, criticism, and then dealing with this Pookie, again, this beta male, against talking behind her back. Again, all of this stress further exacerbated her physical health situation. And as she was dealing with this whole health situation, she found out she had breast cancer. And sadly, as she was too sick to work, Louise Beavers wound up taking her job. And what happened with Hattie McDaniel is that as she was dealing with all of these different health issues, she was dealing with all of these health issues as related to things. And eventually, she wound up suffering a stroke, and eventually had a heart, was complicated by diabetes and a heart ailment in 1951, and was admitted to the hospital, and then eventually wound up dying in 1952 of breast cancer. And sadly, what happened with Hattie McDaniel is, even though there were 3,000 mourners to come out and celebrate her life and achievements, she couldn't even have peace in death. No, she wanted to be buried in the Hollywood Cemetery. Unfortunately, racism in Los Angeles, again, the leftist town that's supposed to be so open and so tolerant, they discriminated against her and wouldn't even honor her last wishes. And she couldn't be buried in the Hollywood Cemetery, so she was buried in the Rosedale Cemetery. And as she was buried in the Rosedale Cemetery, what happened was she wound up again remaining in a cemetery she didn't want to. Now, back in 1999, they offered to reinter Hattie McDaniel in the cemetery that she wanted, but the family declined, and eventually they erected a cenotaph to talk about her accomplishments, but what's really on the record again of things is tarnishing her name, and again tarnishing it because they wouldn't even honor her wishes in death. And even worse than that was what happened afterward to her Oscar. Now, after Hattie McDaniel passed away, she bequeathed her Oscar to Howard University, and after it was sent to Howard University, basically because she sent it there because Howard University honored her for winning the Oscar, the people there dishonored her, and they dishonored Hattie McDaniel by again stealing her Oscar, and then stealing her Oscar, which was never recovered. Some speculate it was thrown in the river because people were angry about her playing maids. Others say it was basically lost as related to people misplacing it, and it was never recovered. And again, the Academy had to replace that Oscar, returning it to Howard University in a ceremony in 2023. They finally returned it years later. And again, Hattie McDaniel, even though she had passed away, she passed away and made good money again, but she didn't know how to manage money because she didn't have a leader as related to a man to help her manage things. And sadly, what happened with the things with the IRS is that they wound up ordering all of her property to be sold off to pay those $11,000 in taxes, and said that it was like the situation wound up, again, they wound up taking her Oscar and all this stuff, but eventually it wound up in Howard University. But the whole thing is that it wound up getting lost. And again, Hattie McDaniel's life was really sad because it really was the archetype for the whole paradigm of failure that many black women had. Again, while many black women had these careers, they really cannot find that success in their personal lives. And many of these women wind up being miserable later on in their life, even though they've got all this money, they have all this stress because they cannot really work with a man. And sadly, with the sad, tragic story of Hattie McDaniel, is that she's the archetype for the modern feminist woman as related to the black community, in that this woman cannot find any peace because of the racism and white supremacy and the inability to get support from your own community. Sadly, what happens with Hattie McDaniel is she's the model for what has dealing with the modern woman deals with. And again, like many modern women, they get all of this success as related to the world, but they wind up miserable in their own company. And that's the reason why many of these women wind up on the road to becoming women in crisis. And sadly, Hattie McDaniel's whole story is the one that many black women should look at, because while she had great success as a black woman and many great accomplishments, her success was basically showed that her life basically wasn't one that was successful, because she never had the intangible of peace. She never had the intangible of joy. No, her life was basically miserable, and that's what happens to most modern women who wind up women in crisis. Now, this was a video requested by a viewer, and if you want to request a video regarding a subject like the Hollywood Historical Women in Crisis series, you can send a donation for a minimum of $15 to the PayPal or the Cash App by clicking the link in the description box. And if I know something about that subject, I will make that video for you. And if you want to learn why women like Hattie McDaniel have had struggles in their lives and why they wound up even on a road to a paradigm of failure in spite of economic success, you can pick up my books, The Woman Crisis and Why 70% of Black Women Are Single, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. And if you want to learn about the struggles of a faded former black actress who wound up in the same situation as a Hattie McDaniel, you can pick up my screenplay book, All About Marilyn, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format, along with these other books. And you can also find all of these same books on other online booksellers like Draft the Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, All About Nikki, a fabulous first season. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air meets Clueless in this absolutely fabulous African-American 1990s teen sitcom. Get all 13 episodes of All About Nikki, the fabulous first season, in paperback and e-readers today. Now available in paperback. From the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Man Crisis, comes The Woman Crisis. Learn why so many women have become lost in their quest to have it all in The Woman Crisis. Get your copy of The Woman Crisis in paperback at Amazon.com and online booksellers today.
Now available for the first time in paperback, Why 70% of Black Women Are Single. Learn all the reasons why so many black women can't find a husband and why 70% of black women are single. Get your copy of Why 70% of Black Women Are Single on Amazon.com today.
Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.